Have you also heard the argument that the states want to save by themselves? I mean, aside the debate of constitutionality, some states have also raised the issue of why can't we do it by ourselves?
I actually, and that's the point that, I didn't fully develop the federalism and the constitutional argument. I actually have some sympathy. First, I believe completely that we need more federalism in Nigeria rather than less. So, all I've said about the necessity for a sovereign wealth fund does not cancel out the arguments of the governors. I see a strong necessity. First of all, you already take the federal government already takes a disproportionate share of revenue, in my view, and that should even be reduced. Secondly, I believe we need to strengthen the states, the federal structure, rather than continue to weaken it. So, in that sovereign wealth fund, I hope that there can be some compromise. That first of all, we should examine the possibility: can the sovereign wealth fund be entirely from federal share of revenues, if the federal government insists,
and not from the national,
and not from the consolidated revenue fund? You see, because there is a consolidated revenue which belongs to all of us, then we share
from there.
Each man, so we can convert or amend the current structure to ensure that the sovereign wealth fund relates to federal share of revenue, in which case it will be a federal body and they will manage their own. But then there's an economic argument which I also subscribe, which is there is no federal economy and there is no state economy. If we destroy the economy, we will all suffer. So if you are managing prudent macroeconomics at the federal level and all the states are mismanaging their economies and they are running budget deficits and they are spending everything and they are taking bonds and they are destroying, when you create inflation, when you create fiscal crisis, it will be Nigeria that will deal with it. It will not be
the federal,
because there is you cannot start separating the economy. So that argument suggests that we should also, so I would hope there's some compromise somewhere that can actually create something like a fund of funds in which you have, in effect, a sovereign wealth fund for the federal government, but that compels some level of savings
from the
states as well, and that allows them authority over the management of the investment, but not so they can manage their own share of their own investment the way they want. They can save as they want, but they cannot opt out of savings. And
will it be managed by the same body regulated by the same act?
It depends. I would like to see some discussion around that. But I think that there should be a provision for Lagos State government to use the Nigerian Sovereign Investment Authority to make investments for the benefit of Lagos State government.
Since they contribute to the sovereign wealth fund anyway.
That compels them to do savings. So they can't opt out of savings. For me, that is critical, because we all have the same economy and we are all going to suffer the consequences if this state becomes insolvent, because it has refused to save. Indeed, it has borrowed, raised bond, borrowed from bank, borrowed from everybody else. Okay. And then one day we have a crisis in a major state that can actually, as we've seen with some states in the US, California, that can actually undermine the whole federal economy.
Connected to the part that, we've seen when governments change from the state's perspective now, sometimes they come up and say, well, I met so and so amount in the coffers, I met this in the coffers. So if the sovereign wealth fund were to be there,
the sovereign wealth fund is an institutional mechanism.
If they were to be for the states, for instance,
exactly.
The argument that the state governments seem to be given, that let's do it by ourselves. Would it be subject?
I would actually like Nigeria to go into the international financial markets with 37 entities, which is why I said I would like to see some creativity around them acting through the Nigerian Sovereign Investment Authority. But it's a kind of fund of funds. There's a federal fund there that the federal NSIA manages for the benefit of federal government, but there's some mechanism through which it can take instructions for, almost like a custodian, that can take instructions from Ogun State, make purchases on behalf of Ogun State based on Ogun State's instructions. But Ogun State cannot say, I don't want to save. That money must be with NSIA.
No, that's the argument. I mean, that's going to be a really hard one.
It's not going to be hard.
Because you're saying that if we're a federal structure, I should be free to determine how I want to run my state.
Yes, and that's exactly what I'm saying.
And if you're saying that they should be compelled to save, I mean, and they do not have the option to opt out
of savings.
Yes,
because we have one economy.
Because the money
we have one inflation rate. We have one national budget deficit. We have where we have macroeconomic crisis. We're going to have it everywhere in the country.
Some people have spoken about one of the arguments I was against it. I mean, for the sovereign wealth fund aside constitutionality was the fact that they said it did not exactly comply with the Santiago principles, which is something that a host of countries that have the SWF funds have to abide by, so to speak. I'll list one of the principles here. It says that's sub-principle 1.2. It goes, the key features of the SWF's legal basis and structure, as well as the legal relationship between the SWF and other state bodies, should be publicly disclosed. So assuming they're not exactly happy with their relationship, aren't they free to voice it?
Like I said, I'm not completely unsympathetic to the arguments of the governors. And what I seek is some debate and some compromise around the structure of the fund that preserves the federal principles and that is compliant with Nigeria's constitution. However, I also know that there was a lot of debates, there was a lot of negotiation, there was a lot of discussion at the National Economic Council before this final bill, structure of this bill was agreed at. And that's the area where I have some confusion, because it was clear. I followed the process. There was Agbaje, who was Minister for Finance then. There was the bill. There were several meetings. There was a committee set up comprising of about 6 governors, one from each zone, including the CBN governor and the Minister of Finance. And there was a whole negotiated process. We delayed the process of submitting the bill on the Nigerian Sovereign Investment Authority to the National Assembly. And it was only after there was some compromise, which was shown on television, that the bill was finally submitted to the National Assembly and passed. So it's a bit curious why
they come out here
afterwards. But I still believe that perhaps people were under pressure to agree at that time, but that we should, yes, preserve the federal principles. And I'm completely sure that I want to see that. I don't want us to continue to to make the states, more and more inefficient, more and more incapable, more and more dependent on the federal government.
So if truly we have to adopt that, is it what kind of money should we be putting there? For instance, for the state government, is it the same money they go to Abuja to share?
No, you like I said before, what we know,
sometimes,
and that's part of what I'm also curious about. There was this agreement, like I said, which was shown on television, that the $1 billion should be taken out of the excess good account and used as the seed funding for the Nigerian Sovereign Investment Authority. So the fund has today the sum of $1 billion technically to invest. Once we create the authority, appoint the people. Now that was seed funding. But the sustained funding is supposed to be, for instance, in 2012, the Federal Minister of Finance has said the price for budget benchmark for this 2012 will be 70. The first said 75, which I thought was optimistic, but they've just reduced it to 70. Now, at 70, if oil prices are then 80, that means for every barrel of oil we sell, $10 will go to the Sovereign Wealth Fund and begin to create that fund on a sustainable basis. So for every barrel of sale over the benchmark, then that excess per barrel will go into the fund. Now, the structure of the fund should make it clear that this is the total funding. But all I'm saying is that I would like a greater state or authority and even dedicated state funds, so that we can see Ogun State Fund. If you go to Nigerian Sovereign Investment Authority, you will see Ogun State Fund.
And how much they actually
are. State Fund.
You think that
Ogun State Commissioner for Finance should have Just like pension, and this thing is not complex. Just like pension fund,
this fear
administrators tell their
producing states will not kick in.
What's the
all this talk about oil producing state? Hey, come on, you're not oil producing state. I'm
they already get that on the derivation.
This is what I should get.
They already get that on the derivation.
That argument shouldn't come again on this.
It may come when you want to now distribute. If you take the current structure, which puts all the money in the Nigerian Sovereign Investment Authority, what it means is that the day you are going to distribute, you will now still have to do it based on revenue structure. But what I'm saying is that even in the fund, not at the point of, you should know, this is my fund and this is what I want to invest it in. Buy this, invest in stocks, invest in Greek, invest in America, invest in China, or don't do this. Because if you invested wrongly, the federal institution invest wrongly, I may feel that I could have done better as Lagos State. I may feel that I wouldn't have done this. I may not have wanted this proportion to infrastructure. I may have wanted this proportion to savings. I may have, you understand? So I'm saying that we should not necessarily diminish the authority or responsibilities of the state government because we want to have sovereign savings. But yes, the argument for sovereign savings is compelling, and even as individuals, imagine if you had a father who said, no, I don't want to save because I want to spend my money myself.
Well, what about, I've just been curious, what is the relationship, for instance, it might be in a relationship, but do you think there's any relationship whatsoever between the Sovereign Wealth Fund Act and our foreign exchange reserves?
Clearly, the savings in the end, under the excess good account, because we didn't create a constitutional mechanism, the money in the excess good used to count internationally as part of our foreign reserves. Technically, it will still be, but now the world will recognize that this is a sovereign wealth fund savings. You understand the portion that the sovereign wealth fund, then there will be the official reserves of the country. The country will still have official reserves because you don't even from the 70, the federal government doesn't have to spend everything. Do you understand? Because the federal government will now, if we stick to the example of 70 and then oil prices are 80, so the 70 goes into the budget,
Federation account,
the Federation account, and we share it, and then everybody spends their own. The federal government still does not have to spend all of its own share of the 70. So if it keeps some, leaves some in foreign currency in its accounts in the offshore, those will continue to accumulate in our normal reserves. But the funding in the sovereign wealth fund will also count. When the world looks at Nigeria, they will see a sovereign wealth fund, and then they will see official reserves, and they will see the total. And in forming their view about the viability or robustness or the strength of the Nigerian economy, they will take all that into account. So when you look at Abu Dhabi, for instance, you will see its reserves, you will see its sovereign wealth fund, and you will see the huge funding there, and then you will feel, oh, this is
as an investor,
strong economy. Yes.
You may look to them and say, well, I think I can go in here.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter, just like everybody else who have a basic account, whether or not you take 3 square meals a day, or even if you have 1 square meal a day, your savings still remains your savings. And so from that perspective, you say they can come together, look at that and see what they can do about it.
Well, most certainly they do. Let's take between 2003 and 2006. One significant factor why our banks got more attractive from the point of view of the world, and why European and American financial institutions extended credit lines to them and gave them huge sums of funding offshore, was because they looked at the country and saw the country's reserves and felt that, okay, financial institutions in this economy should be able to avoid a default because their economy is robust and strong. If you contrast that to 1980, when we had the oil price collapse and banks stopped accepting the letters of credit. Our banks didn't fail, But international banks stopped accepting letters of credit from our banks because they felt if there are banks operating in this economy that is broke because oil prices have collapsed, then they have to pay cash for everything I do with them. They must bring cash on a daily basis because I don't trust the economy from which they are coming. That's an example of the impact of sovereign savings on the creditworthiness of institutions, financial institutions, banks, even businesses, even the states themselves, even the government itself. That's why Nigeria got a good credit rating and why the outlook was positive between 2003 and 2006. The more we stopped saving, that's why our ratings began to be mixed, outlooks began to be mixed between 2007 and 2010.